My screen is also visible to all of you guys, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. So from today and tomorrow, we are going to discuss the routing concept. Today, mostly I'm going to discuss what is routing, what are the different types of routing, how exactly the routing work, what is convention-based routing, how we can customize the convention-based routing, how we can create our own route constraint, right? So those things we are going to discuss today, and tomorrow I'm going to discuss what is route attribute-based routing and how exactly you can make use of our attribute-based routing efficiently in your ASP.NET Core application, right? And this concept, what I'm going to explain, and it is not limited to what I can say ASP.NET MVC, right? The same routing concept, it is also going to be used in ASP.NET Core Web API, right? So in this today and tomorrow, I'm going to discuss this concept in depth, right? And when I'm going to discuss the ASP.NET Core Web API, I'm not going to discuss the same concept again in depth, right? So at that time, I'm just going to use and explain, yes, this is routing, this is how exactly you need to configure, right? So because see, when I'm explaining the concept, right, whichever concept is appropriate, right, which is available in MVC as well as Web API. So I'm going to explain only once, not twice, because doesn't make any sense to explain the same concept again and again, right? We need to learn some new concept, right? We need to learn the concept in depth. That doesn't mean we should learn the same concept multiple times. So let us first understand what is routing, how exactly the routing work in ASP.NET Core, what are the different types of routing, and how we are going to use convention-based routing, attribute-based routing, and is it possible to use both of them, right? If we use both convention-based routing in and attribute-based routing in our application, then what exactly happen? Who will take the precedence? So all these things we are going to discuss. So before starting, if I will ask this question to any to you guys, right? What is routing? Then what is your answer? Because most of the people coming to this session, right, having some ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Web API background, right? And this routing concept is also available in ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Web API. Do you guys think the routing concept is different in MVC and different in Web API, or it is same in both the cases? Those who are having ASP.NET MVC and Web API knowledge, I'm asking to them only. Right?
It's same, sir.
It's same. Yes. It's same or different? It's same.
I think so it's the same. I didn't use the code, but in MVC, ASP.NET MVC routing, attribute routing or convention routing, same applies here. I think so.
No, no, I'm not talking about ASP.NET Core. Asking in ASP.NET MVC and ASP.NET Web API, does the routing are different or the same concept is available in both MVC and Web API? That is what my question.
Yes, same is available.
Right? The same convention-based routing, same attribute-based routing are available in ASP.NET MVC as well as ASP.NET Web API, right? The same concept is here also. Doesn't matter whether you are using ASP.NET Core MVC or ASP.NET Core Web API, right? The routing concept is going to be same. Okay, so you guys are having some experience. So what exactly routing? Let's make it interactive. Don't make the one-way traffic, right? I'm explaining the concept, that is fine, but you also need to participate. What is exactly routing?
I think routing is the way of uh, like whenever we enter the URL and it will take us to the appropriate controller or appropriate method, and it will return us some of the output to the browser. So I think according to that, whatever we give the controller name, method name, so it will take us to that particular method and it will return us output.
Yes,
It
yes,
takes
right.
the route that is defined in the route config.cs file.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
We can have multiple route defined in one.
Yeah, that is
Concept.
fine. Yeah, that is fine. Multiple route you can define. You can use attribute convention based routing, right? That is fine. Okay. So let me explain. Routing exactly, it is a pattern matching mechanism. What is routing? Routing in ASP.NET Core Web Application is a pattern matching mechanism. What exactly is the meaning of a pattern matching mechanism? Now, whatever the request, whatever the HTTP request you send from the browser, right? That request will first handled by the routing engine. The routing engine inspect the URL. So inspect the URL means what? Now inspect the HTTP request. From the HTTP request, from the URL, it will get all the information. All the information means what? Now what is the controller name? What is the action method name? What is the route parameter value? Whether the method is HTTP GET or HTTP POST, right? So all this information will be checked by the routing engine. And after taking all this information, then it will check what is the URL pattern. Pattern is a controller slash action method. Then it will check, is this controller pattern is defined in your application? Yes, it is defined. Then it will take the controller name, action method name, route parameter, input parameter, core string, whatever, right? Then it will take all those values from the HTTP request, and then it will transfer that request, or it will map that HTTP request to the particular action method, right? And this is done in ASP.NET Core MVC application by using the routing middleware component. If you remember, right from the beginning, I'm saying there is a routing. We are using app.use routing. What is the use of that app.use routing? This is the use. It will inspect the incoming HTTP request or incoming URL. It will map the particular HTTP request to controller action method. Clear, guys? Clear? Okay, I will explain it again, right? So we can say that routing is a pattern matching system that monitors the incoming request and figure out what to do with that request, right? So typically routing is used to where to solve the user request, right? For better understanding, look at this diagram. So these are nothing but your client. Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, Edge, right? These are nothing but one browser, and in our client server application, browser is nothing but your client. The client send the request. So once the client send the request, this routing engine, right, first receive the request. And whenever the client send the request is nothing but one HTTP request. That request having some URL pattern, right? Having one URL, HTTPS colon slash domain name slash controller name slash home slash index slash 10, something like this. Then it will inspect the URL. It will check what is the URL pattern, right? Pattern means controller slash action slash, right? That is nothing but your pattern. So once it inspect the pattern, then it will check whether this pattern is defined by the developer in this application, right? If it is defined, then it will check, right? What is the controller name? What is the action method name? What are the route parameter? And accordingly, this routing engine will transfer that particular request to the particular controller action method. Once the request received by the controller action method, then if required, it will work with the model component, and then it will, once it get the data, then it will handle the data to the view might be used this model, or what I can say, model component to represent the data. And once the view render the HTML response, and that response is returned to the client, right? So this is how the routing comes into the picture. So basically, whenever you send the request is first received by the routing engine. The routing engine is decide what to do with that request, right? Whether to what I can say, whether to transfer the request to the action method or not, right? And here also it is right. So what will happen when the routing engine receives the request, right? Understand this thing better, you need to understand this diagram, right? When the incoming HTTP request is received, so this particular position, right, is nothing but your routing engine, right? You can say this is nothing but your routing engine. When the engine receives the incoming request, right, it will parse the URL. So what do you mean by URL parsing? So URL parsing means it will check what is the URL, what is the controller name, what is the URL pattern, what is the action method name, what is the route data, whether the URL that HTTP request is a get request or post request or put request or patch or delete. What kind of request is this? And accordingly, once it got the URL pattern and all these things, then it will try to find a matching route for that particular URL pattern, right? So whatever the URL pattern, for that URL pattern, do you have any matching route? Then you will find answer either yes or no. If you are having any particular route pattern defined for that particular HTTP request, then what it will do, it will get the controller name, action method name, route parameter, method type, and it will send or it will map that particular request, right, to the controller action method, process the request. And once it will process the request, whatever the response is generated, that will be sent back to the client. If there is no route find, right? If there is no matching route found for that particular HTTP request, then what it will do? It is going to generate 404 error, and that 404 error, right? Resource not found will be returned to the HTTP client, right? Who initially made the request. So this is how the routing engine works. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Clear or not? What is exactly the job of routing engine? And this is going to be done by the component what we registered into the ASP.NET Core MVC request processing pipeline. I will show you all these things, right? Before that, let me tell you what are the different types of routing supported by ASP.NET Core. So instead of saying MVC, it is better to say ASP.NET Core because it is applicable to both MVC and Web API, right? MVC and the Web API. So basically, there are two types of routing. One is convention-based routing, and another one is attribute-based routing. So in today's session, we are basically targeting to cover what is conventional-based routing, and tomorrow I'm going to explain what is attribute-based routing. So what is convention-based routing? In conventional-based routing, let us first read the definition, then I will explain. The route is determined based on the conventions defined in the routing middleware, right? So in convention based routing means based on the conventions, right? What is the default URL pattern? What is the pattern you define? What convention you follow to define the pattern, right? Accordingly, the routing is determined, and that routing will map to the right particular controller action method. And before .NET 6, right? Before .NET 6, we are learning currently .NET 6, but before .NET 6, this pattern is defined within the configure method of the startup class. If you are working with the earlier version of what I can say, uh, .NET Core framework, then you will find startup class, you will find configure method, configure service method. So within the configure method of the startup class, you will define this routing. But from .NET 6, you can configure the convention-based routing within the main method of the program class. That means the conventional based routing in MVC or in Web API is a routing, is a mechanism, right? That routing mechanism that relies on a set of conventions and default pattern, right? What are the set of convention and default pattern? I will explain practically. And based on the set of conventions and default patterns, it will map the incoming request to the controller action. So main objective you need to remember, routing means it will map the incoming HTTP request to the controller action method. This type of routing is based on a predefined naming conventions and doesn't require explicit routing attributes or a configuration. So in this case, whatever the predefined naming conventions you provided, that is going to be come into the picture, and that will be work, right? In conventional based routing, the URL segment and their order used to determine the controller and action that should handle the request. That means you can define multiple what I can say routing, multiple conventions. But the important thing is the order. Whatever the order you put all this routing, that order will determine how the request is going to be handled, right? So I will show you how you can create one route, how you can create multiple route when you are creating multiple route, right? How it is going to be handle the incoming HTTP request, right? Everything I will show you practically. So the next one is attribute-based routing. So in this case, by using convention, so we need to define the routing. And attribute routing means by using the route attribute, we need to define the routing. Right? So by using the route attribute, we need to define the routing. So in this case, this convention means it is if you are working with prior to .NET 6, you have to configure this within the configure method of startup class. From .NET 6, you need to configure this within the main method of the program class, right? But in this case, you do not need to use those conventions, right, which define either the startup class or the program class. Attribute based routing means you need to use the route attribute directly on the controller or on the action method. So you can apply that route attribute directly at the controller level, which is going to be applied to all the action methods which are available within that controller. Even it is also possible, right, that you can use that route attribute on the controller action method as well, right? Even though it is possible that you can use both convention based routing and attribute based routing in a single ASP.NET MVC or ASP.NET Web API application. If we use both convention based routing and attribute based routing in our application, then those action methods or controllers which is configured with the route attribute, right? In that case, it will make use of attribute based routing. Give me 1 minute, guys. Right? So the action method or controller which is configured using a route attribute, that will use attribute based routing. Rest of all make use of a conventional based routing. So both are possible, and in that case, if it is decorated with the route attribute, they will make use of attribute routing, else they will make use of a convention based routing. So how the routing is exactly work, right? For example, suppose you visit this URL home/index, right? By default, if you visit this URL, right, then in this case, it will map, the routing engine will map this, what I can say, URL to the home controller index action method. So in this case, this is a URL button, right? So URL button means this is the base URL, and after the base URL domain name, right? It is making use of home/index. So this is the button. So in this case, it will map the URL. Who will map? It will map means the routing engine will map this particular URL to the home controller and the index action method. Similarly, if you make a request to this home/details/2 URL, that means in this case, it will map it to the home controller details action method where it is taking the ID parameter, and it will map this ID, this route value to this ID parameter. Now, the question that should comes to your mind is we have not explicitly defined any routing rules for our application. Then how does this mapping is done? That is how the home/index URL is mapped to the index action method. How that home/details/2 URL is mapped to the details action method of the controller class. This is done by the MVC middleware component, which we registered into our request processing pipeline. Right. So let us understand all these things practically by taking one exam, by creating one application, right? So I'm opening Visual Studio 2022. I'm creating a new project, and in this case, I'm going with this default template, right? Model view controller. Providing the name, you can give any name. I'm giving routing in ASP.NET Core MVC. click on the next button. I'm targeting .NET 6. I'm currently not using any kind of authentication, and I don't want that top level statement. So I want my program class, my right, the class would contains the class name and the method name, and then click on the create button. So once you click on the create button, it will take some time and it will create the project for us. Right, so the project is created. So once the project is created, we need to understand the default route in ASP.NET MVC application, right? So if you visit, right, the code, then you will see three things. First of all, it will add controller with views services. Why it is required? Can anybody tell me what is the use of this service?
It will basically add controller functionality that is required for to receive the request and all controller. And
No,
views means the
not
method.
exactly, not exactly controller. So basically, if you want to develop a model view controller application, that is which is going to be having controller as well as model as well as views, then you need to use this one, right? Correct. So basically, if you want to develop MVC based application, you have two options. You can make use of add MVC, or you can make use of add controller with views. Right? If you use only add controller, then in that case, view will not come into the picture. But in this case, you can make use of right. You can create controllers, you can create views. Both are possible, right? So this service is required in order to make your .NET Core application as a model view controller, or you can say MVC based application. And apart from this, right, currently we are not using any kind of authentication authorization. Let's make this, I can remove these things, right? And here you can see we are having one component, use routing. And this routing component is basically used to inspect the incoming HTTP requests, inspect the URL pattern, right? And then it will check, right, whether this URL pattern, what the client is sending, is this the pattern configured in our application, and that pattern you can configure using this map controller route. So using this map controller route, you can configure as many, right, as many route you want that you can configure. Currently by default one pattern is configured, right? And what is the URL pattern? The pattern is this one, right? Controller action and ID. That means if any request come to your application with this pattern which contains something, some text value slash some other text value or some values, right, like this, then in that case, that is a valid pattern. And in that case, right, based on the right controller name and action method name, what is coming in the URL parameter, this route engine will map that request to that particular action method, right? So using this routing engine, it will map the incoming HTTP request to the particular action method, and what are the routing that you require for your application that you need to define by using this map controller route to middleware component. So guys, clear? Now you guys understand what is the use of this one and what is the use of this one? Right?
Yeah.
Why we are having two middleware component? One middleware component is basically used to define the URL pattern for your application. How you can handle the incoming, right? What is the pattern that the client should follow to access your resources? And another middleware component is basically going to inspect the incoming URL, right? Check what are the controller name, right? What is the URL pattern, right? If this pattern is defined in your application, then it will get the controller name, action method name, route parameter, and accordingly it will map that particular request to the controller action method, right? For example, if you send home slash product slash details, so in that case it will check what is the URL pattern, product slash details. That means is this pattern defined by this in this application? Yes, this is the controller name, this is the action method name, and this is the optional parameter, right? So this pattern is defined. So in that case, this routing engine, what it will do, it will map that particular HTTP request to the controller product and the action method, whatever the details or anything, right? It will map to that particular controller action. So Both are having important role. If you remove if you comment this one, then it will not work because it will not, because it is unable to inspect the incoming HTTP request and unable to map that request to the particular action method. And if you comment this one, then also it will find that there is no route defined in your application, so I can't serve any incoming HTTP request. So both are important. You should use both, use routing and map controller route. And this is, and what is the use of this add controllers with view? Basically, this is going to provide the services, right? If you are creating one controller, if you are creating one view, only because of this one, right? The controller services, the view services, right? If you are going to use throughout your application, then first of all you need to add the services, add the required services to the built-in dependency injection container, right? So you need to understand these two things. And in this case, we are having one default URL pattern. So you can give any name, right? Here by default, it is giving the name as default, but you can also give any name to your pattern, and you can also modify this thing. Everything we are going to discuss. So now, if you look at the URL pattern, what is the default URL pattern? Controllers equals to home, action equals to index, and ID. This is the optional parameter. So this is the URL pattern. So this is required for routing, and this will define the route pattern along with the default route. So what is the default route? Default route in the sense, if you do not specify anything in the URL, then by default it will take home controller, because what is the default value you provided for the controller is home, and the default action method you provided is index. So by default, it will execute the home controller and index action method, right? So in this example, right, map controller route method is used to define a default route. In this case, you can see this map controller route method is defined a default route. Patterns parameter specifies the route template, right? In this case, this pattern parameter specifies the route template. That means what is the URL pattern, how the application is going to handle the URL pattern, what should be the URL pattern, right? That is going to defined by this pattern, and within this pattern, you can see we are using some placeholder. What are the placeholder? Controller is one placeholder, action one placeholder, ID one placeholder, and these are nothing but, you can also say these are the route parameters, right? And the name parameter gives, right, a name to your route, and which can be used for generating URL, right? Here you can see controller. So what this controller parameter inside this URL, inside this pattern represent, it represent the name of the controller class. What is this action parameter? It represents the method name within the controller. And what is this ID parameter? It defined, right? In this case, in this pattern, it is one optional route parameter, right? Why it is optional? Because we have put the question mark, right? So with this configuration, if you are sending one URL like home/index, then it will match, right? It will map this particular URL to the home controller and the index action method, right? In this case, it will map the URL to home controller and the index action method. Suppose you are passing the URL pattern like this, products/retail/5. Then what it means? It means it will map the request to the products controller details action method, which is having the ID parameter, and it will map this value 5 to the ID parameter of the details actions method of the products controller. You guys understand?
Yes.
Clear?
Yes.
Right? So for example, if we issue one request like this home details to, that means it will map the request to the home controller details action method, and the value is 2. So in this case, first segment of the URL, that is home, is mapped to home controller. But now you might have one question, sir, only home word is there, how it will map to the controller, home controller? Yes, this is possible, because we do not have to use the word controller in the first segment, but it maps to the home controller, because ASP.NET MVC framework finds the word home as the first segment path of the URL, and it internally appends the word controller, right? The second segment of the URL, that is details, is nothing but it mapped to the details action method of the home controller, and the third segment of this URL pattern, that is the value 2, is mapped to the ID parameter of the details action method of the home controller. So as you can see, the default URL pattern is this one, right? If you look at this, so this is nothing but your default URL pattern. So what it means, now we have a question mark at the end of the ID parameter, which makes the ID parameter as optional. That means following two requests, right? If you are asking home details 1, home details, that means in both the cases, it is going to invoke what it is going to, which action method is going to be invoked? It is going to invoke the details action method of the home controller. Why both URLs are valid and why both are going to be invoked by the details action method? Because ID parameter is optional. Optional parameter means what? If you want, you can pass the value. If you don't want, don't pass the value. And going further, I will show you how you can make the route parameter as mandatory. How you can provide some default value to the route parameter, right? Everything we are going to discuss one by one. But now we are keep focusing on the default URL pattern. Right. In the default URL pattern, you also need to observe that the value home in the controller, right? If you see, the default value for the controller is home, and the default value for the action method, action parameter is index. So what it means? That means if we navigate to the base URL of the application, right? For example, let's assume this is the base URL. So in that case, it is going to execute the home controller and the index action method. And along with this, you can also access the method like this. You can specify both controller and index action method. You can specify only the controller name. And in that case, it is going to map the index action method, right? So the default route works fine for most of the MVC application. Now let us understand this by creating a controller. So I'm going to create another controller to this folder, right? Let me add a controller, right click, controller empty, right? I'm providing the controller name as home controller.cs. The first part is you can give. The second part is compulsory. It is going to be controller, right? So now I'm adding this. So I'm creating one student controller. Then I'm copy pasting this code. So basically, if you look at this thing, right, here we are creating two action method. One is index, another one is details. This index action method does not take any parameter, but this details action method, it is taking the ID parameter, but that is an optional ID parameter because we are putting this question mark, right? So now the URL student slash index, right? If you are sending, then it is mapped to the index action method of the controller class. Similarly, student slash details, if you are asking, making a request to student slash details or student slash details slash some integer value, right? Both are going to be mapped to the details action method of the which controller? Student controller, right? So this is how it is going to work. Now let me show you this thing, right? So in our application we are having two controller. One is home controller having the index action method, and another one is student controller having index and a details action method. And this is our program class where we have configured one default route pattern. What is the route pattern? Controller slash action slash ID. So if we do not specify anything in the URL, means the default URL, then in that case, it will map the right HTTP request to the home controller and index action method. This is because we have specified the default value in this URL pattern. So okay, let me set the IIS Express and run the application, right? So by default, it will launch the application with the default URL. And as you know, the default URL is set for the index action method of the home controller. So in this case, this index action method of the home controller is executed. Now in the URL, if you only specify the home, then by default it is going to check for the home controller what is the default action method. Yes, it is index action method. So in that case, it is going to execute the same index action method, even though it is possible to specify the index keyword, right? And in that case, again, it is going to execute the index action method of the home controller, right? Now, if you want to execute the student controller, then the same URL pattern you need to follow. What is the pattern? Pattern means it is going to be student, right? And it is going to be the action method name. So this is the default URL pattern. So in this case, if this is available, then it is going to execute. And we are having another method, details. I'm clicking on details, even though I can access the details action method by passing some value. So I can access this, but this is the default pattern. Now what I'm trying to make you understand is I remove the students. So only details and 100, right? In this case, is this a valid URL pattern, guys?
No, sir.
No.
No.
So if it is not a valid URL pattern, then then whenever the request is received by the routing engine, it will try to find a matching route for this particular URL. And in that case, is it going to find a matching route?
No.
No.
So if it is not found, then what error it should give to the client,
So not true. Not true.
right? So let us try to execute this and see what happens. So we are getting this 404 error,
Yes.
right? So this is how the routing engine is going to be work. Clear, guys? This is the default URL pattern. Now, next, we are going to modify the default URL pattern, right? And we are going to see what are the other things we can do with the default URL pattern. But now, is that clear how the default URL pattern is going to work?
Sir, this 404 is specific to when it does not find the action method, right?
Exactly. No, does not find the action method. Whenever there is no route find, in that case, it is going to return this one. But in this case, what will happen? Now we are providing one pattern. The pattern should be like this: the controller name slash the action method name slash ID parameter, which is optional. So, but in this case, it is only having one string value, and this is an invalid pattern only. So in this case, he is unable to identify whether what is this details is all about. It is the controller name, or it is the action method name, or what is this? He's unable, because in this type of a pattern it's not defined in our application. Later I will show you if you want to access the details, student details action method using this pattern, right? Like this, whatever in the URL. Can we do this? Yes, we can do this, but this is not possible with the default URL pattern. For that, we need to define our one pattern. So in this case, this is the pattern. Pattern means details class 100. Is there any pattern defined in our application where it is taking some string value slash 100? No. You have to specify controller and action both. If any one is missing, then it is an invalid pattern, right?
Sir, one
Clear, guys?
question.
Yes.
If you not define this map controller route, then it will be take that pattern or
See, in this case, if you comment this, then tell me, is there any pattern available in your application?
no.
So in that case, if pattern is not available, then what this use routing method will do? You will find that there is no pattern. So simply it is going to return 404 error,
04. Okay.
right? So for example, we comment this one, right? Right, run the application and see what happens. You are getting this
Okay.
404 error. Why? Because
Yeah.
it will try to figure out, is there any default pattern defined for your application, right? So that I can execute that default controller action method. No, the default is not defined, right? Even it is also possible, right? If you want, right? I don't want any default URL pattern, right? I can simply remove this one. So in this case, right, by default, whenever you launch the application, it will not execute anything, right? Because there is no right default controller action method defined in your URL pattern. Now try to run the application, you will not get any output, right? You will get, but now if you try, if you want, then you can access home index method, you can access the others as well, right? So this URL pattern is mandatory.
Okay.
Clear?
Yes.
Right. So can we configure multiple convention-based routing in MVC application or web API application? Yes. So we can configure multiple conventional-based routing in ASP.NET Core MVC application. To do this, what we need to do? We need to use multiple map controller route method, right? So how? So for example, we are having the student index action method, right? In this case, you can see I'm having the student index action method. So as per the default routing pattern, how I can access this method? I can access this method using student slash index. Clear? As per this URL pattern, how you are going to access this method? You have to specify the student slash index in the URL. Otherwise, this action method is not going to be executed. Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes.
But now what is my requirement? I don't want to follow that default URL pattern. I want to execute this action method using student slash all. Is that possible? Yes, that is possible. How? So you need to define another controller route, right? Like this. Here you need to provide any name to your partner. You can provide the pattern as student slash all. So in this case, you can see what is the URL pattern. The URL pattern is like this. So this is the default URL pattern. But I want to create a different pattern like student slash all. And whenever the user send this student slash all, I want to execute the student controller and index action method, that what you need to specify using the default attribute. So using the name attribute, you can give a name to your URL pattern. You can give any name, but that should be unique. You can give the pattern, right? How you should access this pattern, right? How you should access this URL. You need to provide the student slash all in the URL. And once you provide student slash URL, this pattern is going to be mapped, right? It will check, the routing engine will check, is there any pattern defined in your application? Yes, student slash one pattern is defined in the application. Okay, then what is the controller name? What is the action method name? The controller name is student and the index action method name is index. Okay. So I need to, so yes, this is student slash all URL pattern means I need to execute the student and the index action method, student controller index action method. So in that case, the controller, the routing engine will map the incoming URL to the index action method of the student controller. Now what is my next requirement? Right, I want to access the student details. So we are having one action method, that is student details. So in this case, by default, right, you need to access this action method using student slash details. It is mandatory or optional. If you want, you can pass this ID parameter value. If you do not want, you can skip this, right? That is fine. Now, what is my requirement? I want to execute this student details action method using this URL pattern. Student details slash 10. Is that possible? Yes, that is possible. By using a default convention, it is not possible. For this purpose, what we need to do is we need to create our own URL pattern. How we can create this one? You can give any name, student index, anything you can give, student details, right? Anything you can give. Then in the pattern, you have to specify student details slash, this is the value, this is the route parameter, and here I'm passing ID. And then whenever the URL coming to the routing engine like the student details slash 10, then it will check, is there any URL pattern defined in this manner? Yes, it is defined. Then what is the controller and action method for that URL? Right, for that pattern, yes, the student controller details action method. Okay, let me execute let me map this particular incoming URL or incoming HTTP request to the student controller and details action method, right? I want to access the student controller index action method using student all. I want to access student controller details action method using this URL pattern. For rest of the all controller, I want to follow this pattern, controller name slash action method name. Then in that case, you need to define like this controller action, right? ID or integer something like this. So what is this ID and all these things I will discuss after some time. Okay, let me first modify the application code like this.
Sir,
Right?
one doubt here.
But for time being, I'm removing this one. For time being, I'm right. Even though I can also put this code directly here, right? Home and action equals to index. Right. For the time being, I'm not creating a separate path. Right. So this is the
Sir, can I ask a doubt?
Yes.
In the first two things, like your pattern is you're given
Pattern name you
controller
can
name.
give anything. Pattern name you can give any name. Name means what I'm saying. You can give any name, but that should be unique. In this case, student all. Right. So what I can give instead of student index, I'm giving this as student details. So you can give student index or student all. Anything. You can give any name. you can define your own pattern that in this name and in this pattern, there's no relation between your controller action method and name.
But
Clear?
how the URL will map? Suppose you have mentioned as
So see, in
in
this case, suppose from the URL, from the client, you send this URL. So in this URL, what is the pattern? The pattern is this one, student/all.
okay.
So then this use routing means it will check, right? Is there any pattern defined in your application which name, right? Which pattern is student/all? Is there any URL a pattern defined in your application? Yes, this pattern is available here. Then in that case, it will check what is the controller name, what is the action method name, and accordingly you will execute the student controller and the index action method. In this
But
case,
all
this is
not a method, no, sir. Here all
the, all it
the
is now. Where
students.
is see where is this all? Is there any method we defined with the name all in our application?
No, but how is it matching with the index? Even though if it is mentioned all,
See,
so it
in
will
this
not
case,
show
in this case, you are
all.
providing here na. In this case, in the default attribute, you are providing what is the controller name and what is the action method name whenever we are having this part. This is default
But
URL pattern, but this is user defined pattern. Here we are defining the pattern, and here we are specifying what is the controller name and action method name. So whenever the URL coming to the, whenever the user sending an URL, right, sending an HTTP request with this student/all pattern, then the routing engine in that case will map that particular request to this student controller index action method, what you specified here. Where is your doubt
but
exactly? I don't
will it
understand.
suppose like in the URL normally first after that basic URI we write as student which represents the controller, and after the slash
So,
whatever we
see,
mention
what
normally
I'm
that
saying.
is mapped to
See,
a method.
that is the wrong concept, na? That is the wrong concept. You thought that the home is the controller name, index is the action method name, and that is only for the default URL pattern, man. I'm not talking about this default URL pattern. So this is the, don't think that in the URL student/home means it should be student should be the controller name and the home should be the action method name. Don't think like that. So instead of student, I can give. So if you are confusing, I can give my student. Instead of my student, I'm saying college student. So no issue. So you can give any name. And the pattern is like this. So don't think that this is the controller name and this is the action method name. So what I'm saying from the beginning, it is the URL pattern, right? Am I mentioned right anything right in this case, controller name or action method name? So this is the URL pattern only. Right? From this URL pattern, this routing engine will check whether this URL pattern is available inside this action inside your application. Yes, available. If available, then what is the pattern name? So in this case, if you are using a placeholder, right? In this case, suppose in this case, okay, let me do one more thing. Instead of using this one, right? I comment this one and I put this one, right? So in this case, I'm using placeholder. So in this case, what will happen now whenever the URL comes like this, right? Home, index, home, details. So in this case, whenever the URL come to the client, right? Whenever the URL received by the routing engine will check the pattern. What is the pattern? Pattern means some text followed by some text. Is there any pattern defined where it should be something like, yes, this is nothing but some text followed by some text. So in that case, this is nothing but what your placeholder, and this placeholder will replaced by this home. So what this placeholder represent? Controller. That means the routing engine will assume, right? I will assume that this home is nothing but your controller name. What is the second pattern? The second segment. The second segment is index. right? And that second segment is mapped with this action. Action means your action method. So in that case, it will map right. It will map to the index action method of the home control. If you don't like this pattern, then let me change this one, right? So to make you understanding what I'm doing this time. Is this in this case? Do you think that whenever you send this URL, it is going to so what in that case, what it will assume? In this case, what the routing engineer think? What is this home is all about?
Action.
Action method. What this index is all about? The controller only. So is there any control right? Is there any controller with the name index which is having home action method? No. So in that case, when it will not execute, it will say that resource not found. Let us prove this one only. home/index, right? So now if you run the application, then don't think that in this case, right, that home is the controller and index is the action method. See, we are getting 404 because there is no such controller and action method is found which can execute this thing. But in this
Sir,
case,
can you
do you think that this home is the controller and index is the action method in this particular URL pattern? So based on the
No.
pattern only you need to decide. In this pattern, the first segment is nothing but your action method. And that means this is your first segment. So that is what I explained before some times.
hello, sir? Can you
Yes.
use the same code in the browser? Can you swap the action method and controller to check whether it is working fine or not? Keep the
Yes,
code
yes,
the same.
100%. Yes, yes, it is going to working fine 100%. So in this case, this first segment of the URL is nothing but your controller, and the second segment in the URL is nothing but your action method. So now if you run the application and if you visit to this home/index, then definitely it is going to execute, right?
I
The
think he
index.
means the action and controller.
Yes, the Ulta.
Oh my, that means you need to swap here only, right?
In the browser, first I need to
Yes,
show
yes, yes, yes. I
index.
understand. Yeah. So this is what you mean to tell, right?
Yes.
Right. So in this case, definitely it is going to execute the index action method of a home controller, right? Now let me run this application. Right? By default, it will not execute anything. And the index/home. We are getting the output.
Okay. Yeah.
Clear?
So is it
Clear?
slash is mandatory here? So can I use any other
Obviously.
character?
Sorry.
Um, Here in the pattern you have defined the
The
separation
slash is
between the
mandatory.
index.
Na? Slash is mandatory.
Can
Slash
I
is mandatory.
replace any other character instead of suppose plus in the pattern? Can I
Plus,
use the same
suppose
thing in?
suppose you want to make this something like this.
Yes, yes, yes.
So let us try this. Right. So this is a invalid pattern. Right. So count the error while action. Right. This is not possible. This
Okay,
is a invalid pattern. So you have to specify that slash.
okay. Thank you, sir.
Right. So now if you run the application, right, you can access the student controller index action method using college student slash all URL pattern. You can access the student controller details action method by using student details slash ID value. And here, but generally the default URL pattern should be like the controller name, action method name, followed by the optional ID parameter, right? Now run the application and check whether everything is working as expected or right. So if you go to /home/index, right, then it should execute the index action method. Now, if you go right, I want to execute the student details. Right, for student details, what is the URL pattern? Student details/ID. Right, so in this case, ID is not optional. So in this case, ID, so simply if you pass, you will not get the data, because in this case, ID is not optional. If you want to make optional, then you need to provide question mark. So ID is not optional. So I need to pass some value, right? So you can see details action method is executed. And what is the URL pattern to access this index action method of student controller? College student slash all, right? So college student slash all. So this is how you can access. And this is important. Providing this routing is important. And the last routing component should be your default. If you put this in the beginning, right, then see what happens.
So then the pattern keyword,
See,
whatever we give in pattern keyword is important than like action
exactly. So
method and
these are default student slash index. See, you can access student slash index action method. Why? Because the first pattern is there in the URL, and this pattern is matched with the incoming URL. So in that case, it can execute your action method, even though if you don't want to execute the index action method using the default URL pattern, right? So in your application, the custom URL pattern should be placed first, and the last one should be your default URL pattern, right? So whichever prior pattern you want to give priority, that should be come first, and the last one should be your default URL pattern. So in this case, this controller, this action, these are token. You can change their name, right? These are I mean, this is the controller means it is a predefined token. Action means it is a predefined token. You cannot use the other name. Clear, guys?
so in the first two URLs that you are given, pattern is the important uh, aspect, right? Like
See,
whatever we mention in the
obviously,
pattern,
this
if
pattern
that
exactly.
matches with the URL, then it will automatically create map that controller what we mentioned there as a new controller
Exactly.
and action.
Exactly. Exactly. So this pattern is important. Whatever the pattern you specify, if that pattern, right, whenever the request comes, this user routing engine will check whether that URL pattern is available or configured in your application or not. If configured, then it will map the request to the particular controller and action method. If it is not configured, then it will throw you some kind of 404 error.
So what if the pattern matches with the two mapping that we done? Which one it will take as a priority? Suppose if both the methods having the same pattern.
So you can't, it is not possible that you can create two methods having the same pattern. See, for example, if you want to access both the method using the same pattern, it is not possible. You will get some kind of error. That is multiple endpoints for the given request, right? See, now I'm trying to run the application. Multiple endpoint for the given request. What is the pattern? Pattern is college student slash all. So you will get one ambiguity error. That is, there are two action method or two requests found for that particular. So in this case, college student slash all. Why it is happening like this? Okay, so in this case, first it will check this pattern. This pattern is matched, so it will execute this student slash all, right? But if you configure this using attribute routing, then you will get multiple endpoints, right? For runtime error. That is what we will discuss. But in this case, whenever the request comes, this is the first pattern, this is the second pattern, and this is the third pattern, right? So whenever the request comes, is that request mapped with this URL pattern? Yes, mapped, then it will always going to be execute. It will not execute this one. Clear? But this is not happening with the attribute routing. In attribute routing, you will get a error immediately. If you are having two endpoints having the same URL pattern, that I will show you how you will get and how you can resolve the error with attribute routing. For conventional based routing, the order is important. Whatever the order you specify in the same order, it will check the pattern. And whenever it found a pattern, it will execute that corresponding controller and the action.
Sir, what is the defaults, sir? Defaults?
This is the default one, no?
No, the top defaults. Defaults, it's new controller.
Defaults means this is the defaults means whenever this URL pattern is gone, right? So which controller and action method you want to execute, that what you need to specify using this default attribute. And if you do not specify this, then in whenever the request comes, right? The user sends that the client sends makes the request call a student slash all. In that case, which controller and which action method you want to execute, how you will identify? We have not specified anything. We have not specified. So in this case, we are specifying the token. Token means the first segment will be replaced with the controller. The second segment will be replaced with the action method, right? Whatever coming from the URL. So from the URL only, it will map to this home as the controller. It will consider these details as the action method. But in this case, we do not have such things now. We do not have that controller token, action method token. We are having some hard-coded URL pattern. Then in that case, it is mandatory to provide the default value for that pattern. Clear?
Yes.
Clear, guys? How you can define the multiple route for your application?
Yes.
So this is how you need to create multiple URL pattern in your application, right? Now we need to understand some customization. Customization means how you can make the parameter optional, how you can make the how we can make the parameter optional, and how we can make the parameter mandatory. So all these things are possible, right? Custom routing in ASP.NET Core MVC allows us to define our whole URL routing patterns. In this case also, this is nothing but our custom routing, but we have not done many customization with the URL part, right? So custom routing means it allows us to define our own URL routing pattern for our application, giving us more control over how URLs are mapped to controller actions. This can be useful when creating SEO-friendly URLs, right? If you want to create a SEO-friendly URL, then this custom URL pattern or custom routing is important, right? So custom routing without default values, right? Custom routing without default values means, okay, let me first comment all these things. We do not record this thing. So without a default value, that means in this case, this is one URL pattern. Any name you can give. Suppose I'm giving the name as a custom routing, right? In this case, we have not provided any default value for the route parameter, right? We have not specified what is the default value for controller. We have not specified what is the default value for action. And this is also what I can say. This is a uh, right. If you want, you can also simply remove this one. ID parameter you can remove. So this is the pattern what I can say without a default value. So in this case, whenever you run your application, it is mandatory. You should provide the controller name and action method in the URL. Let me run the application. Right. By default, you can say no action method of no controller is going to be executed. Home index, yes. Then we are having student index, right? So this is how student index, student details. So this is how you need to create routing without any default value. So in this case, we are not providing any default values. Clear, guys?
Yeah.
Right. If you provide some default value, right, like this home and index, then in that case, the home controller and the index action method is going to be executed whenever you launch the application. That means for the base URL, right? You can say the home controller and index action method. So it is up to you if you want to provide some default value for your controller or not. If you remove, then it is by default, it will not execute what I can say, any controller action method. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. Then the next thing what we need to understand is route constraint in ASP.NET MVC applications, right? So route constraint means what I'm going to do, I'm making the third parameter as ID, right? So ID parameter is this one. Now, what is our requirement? Now let me do some changes, right? So this is my student controller, right? So in this case, you can say the index action method taking one ID parameter, the details action method taking one ID parameter. And this is possible because here we are defining the ID route parameter. So in this case, the value is mandatory. I'm not making this as optional. It is a mandatory value. So what will happen, right? So what will happen now? If you run the application, then you can access the method, right? Student slash index, right? By passing some value. So this 100 is fine. Now, what is our problem? The problem is if I pass 100 XYZ, then it is also accepting the value. Understand? That means what is our requirement? We want to restrict this, right? We want to restrict this means what? Now we don't want to accept, right, this alphanumeric or this alphabet in the route parameter. Understand my point, guys? So the route parameter, what we defined in the URL pattern, that should not accept any alphanumeric value, that should not accept any only alphabet. Then what it should accept? It should accept only integer values. Then for that purpose, what we need to do, we need to use something called route constraint. That means what? Now, whatever the route parameter you specified, do you want to apply some kind of a constraint? Constraint means some kind of a rules, some kind of a restriction. If that rules and restriction is not followed, then it will not map the incoming HTTP request to the particular controller and action method. For example, I want to apply that this ID parameter should accept only integer value. Then what you need to do, you just need to write question mark and integer. Once you do these changes, then what will happen? Now, whenever you access the, what I can say, whenever you access the URL by passing the ID parameter value as integer, then in that case, it is going to map the URL to the home controller and sorry, in that case, it will map the URL to the particular controller and index action method, right? Let's give me 1 minute. So in that case, it will map the controller and to the action method only if the ID parameter is integer. If other than integer, then it will not map. Let us prove this, right? So we need to go to the student controller index or details action method. By default, it will not map, right? So what I'm passing 100. It is executing the action method. Instead of numeric, what I'm trying to pass X, Y, Z. See, we are getting the 404 error. Only XYZ, then what? See, and what happens? Only XYZ, you are getting the 404. And this is how you can provide restriction to your ID parameter using the route constant. This is nothing but your route constant. Now you might be thinking that, sir, what is my requirement? My requirement is I want to accept the ID parameter only integer value, right? But if the user doesn't specify any value, then by default, I want to make this as an optional parameter. That means what? Now, if the user passing any value, then that value should and must be integer type. If it is not passing the value, then no matter. But if passing, then it should be integer. Then in that case, if you want to apply some kind of optional parameter, then you need to put this question mark. Once you put this question mark, then what this ID in question mark means, now you can pass only integer values. If you are passing string values or alphanumeric values, then it will not map. And if you are not passing, then fine, it is going to be optional parameter, right? So with these changes, what will happen now? If you run the application, right? So now if you run the application, then home/index, right? Not home/index. You can see student/index. It is executing the index action method. I'm passing 100. It is executing the student action method. But now, if I'm passing XYZ, it will not execute. If I'm going to pass XYZ 100, then also it is not going to execute. But if I remove this XYZ or 100 or something like this, default, the ID parameter is optional. Passing integer, it is also optional. But alphanumeric or alphabet, it is not allowed. So that is what also it is possible using this route constant. Clear, guys? Right? And apart from this integer, you can provide some long, quaint, boolean, alphabet, right? Alphanumeric, we will create some alphabet length, minimum, maximum. What is the what length character should be? What is the minimum, maximum, right? Integer value that what you can also pass. For example, in this case, so what I'm making, right? I'm making that the minimum value is 10, the maximum value is 20, right? So now if you run the application, why route creation could not find a constructor for constructor the following parameter. Okay, why I'm getting this error? I think this has been removed from what I can say .NET 6. Integer min max restrict the parameter into it should work. Why it is not working? Okay, I will check why it is not working and I will come back to you guys. Right, but it should work, right? Might be it is removing from .NET 6. I don't know why it is not working. I will check and I will come back to you guys, right? So, but this is how you can provide your route constraint, right? How to provide default route values in ASP.NET Core MVC application, right? Default values means we have already discussed. You have to provide the default values like this: controller equals to home, action equals to index. So this is how you need to provide the default values. Else, what you can do, you can create this defaults, right? There are two options, right? This is one option, and the another option is you need to make use of this defaults, right? And in this case, what you need to provide, you need to provide the default parameter, right? Default parameter, how you can provide, you need to create one object where you need to provide anonymous object where you need to provide the controller name and the action method name, right? So how you can create, so anonymous object means a new keyword you need to use, and here you need to provide the controller name, whatever the name you want, and the action method name, right? So the controller is home controller and the action method is, right, and the action method is index action method. This is how you need to provide. And now from here, as we are using this statement, so what you can do, you can simply comment this one, right? You can simply comment this one, and from this pattern you can simply remove. Both are possible, right? While creating the pattern, you can specify the default values, or even you can use this default attribute to specify the default values, right? Now if you run the application, right, then by default that home controller and the index action method is going to be executed, right? So this is how you need to provide the default values. Clear, guys?
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
I want to ask one. How do handle if there are multiple ID parameters?
No, you can't use multiple right optional parameter. It is not possible. Only one parameter that you can make as of. For
Okay.
if you are having multiple, that you can define and that you can pass using core string.
Okay.
Right? For example, in this case, okay, let me explain these things also. In this case, student controller string ID. Along with the ID, I'm having the string name parameter, right? Then in that case, your action method taking two parameters. Then what you can do? you while calling this action method, you need to pass this name as part of your query string, right? For example, student slash index slash 10 slash 100 question mark name equals to hello. You can pass like this. Clear?
Clear, sir. Clear.
So this is how you need to provide route constraint. And I will come back to you guys why that the minimum and the maximum is not working. Apart from that, any question from anyone? Okay. So next, what I'm going to
Sir,
yes.
same way we can apply to the web API also, right?
Yeah, so this routing it is not specific to MVC. Routing is means it is specific. It is not specific to MVC. Means it is
Nothing
the
different
same
in
thing.
API.
No, it is there is no difference in API. The same concept from the beginning only. I'm saying this routing concept is applicable to both MVC as well as web API. The same manner. The way we are creating the managing the routing here, in the same manner, it is also going to be work in web API as well. Right. So you do not need to do anything special. The same concept is also available in ASP.NET Core Web API. Right. So now what I'm going to discuss, right? It is one of the important concept, right? Custom route constant, right? So custom route constant means if you want to restrict to integer, character, string, boolean, right? Those things are possible using this built-in route constant, right? But what about if I want to create our own constant, right? So currently, if you say this ID parameter accepting only integer values, it is not accepting string values. It is not expecting alphanumeric values. Only numeric values it is expecting, right? So now my intention is I want to restrict this ID parameter to accept only alphanumeric value. If I'm passing alphabet only, it should not accept. If I'm passing numeric only, then also it should not accept. But if I'm passing some alphanumeric string value, then it should accept. Then for that purpose, we do not have any built-in route constant. So we need to create our own custom route constant. Now let us see how we can create our own constant. Right. So for that purpose, what we need to do, we need to create a class, and that class should implement the iRoute constant interface. And this iRoute constant interface having one method called match, and we need to provide implementation for this match method in our class. If you look at this match method, it is having some parameter. So what is the use of a HTTP context parameter? We have already discussed from the day one. This HTTP context parameter provides us the flexibility to access the request URL. What is the request type? What is the request data? What is the request? What is the response? Everything you can access using this HTTP context. So basically, to access the request and response, you need to use this HTTP context object. What is this iRouter means? This is going to provide you the requested URL, right? What is the URL? That what you will get using this route parameter. Route key means this is nothing but your route parameter. What is the parameter to which you want to do some kind of validations? That parameter is you will get by using this route key. And this values means for this route, suppose in this case ID, and for that ID parameter, whatever the value, what value the user is sending, that value you will get by using this values route values dictionary, right? So, and then route to direction. Direction means it will identify whether this request is coming from an HTTP request or it's a URL generation. Means internally you are accessing or from the URL this request is coming, right? So basically what we need to do, we need to create a custom class, and then we need to provide implementation for this route constraint interface. Let us first do this, and then I will show you how you can register your one constraint, right? And then how you can use your one constraint in your URL pattern, right? So for that purpose, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a class file with the name alphanumeric constant.cs. So go to the models folder. You can create this anywhere. I'm creating this inside the models folder. So I'm creating a class file with the name alphanumeric constant.cs. And this, what I can say, this match method, it is going to return true and the return type is Boolean. Boolean means what? Now, either it will return true or it will return false. If it return true, what it means whatever the value you are passing for the route parameter is valid. If it return false, means what? That the route parameter value is not valid. For example, in our case, if I am passing the ID parameter only integer number, then it should return me false. If I am passing only string values, then it should return me false. If I am passing alphanumeric, means the value contains both the numeric number as well as alphabet, then in that case, it should return me true. So basically, I'm giving this. So you can do some validation for the mobile number. You can do validation for the email ID. You can do some validation for the integer, right? Integer means you need to check whether this integer is in a particular range or not. That is also possible using this alphanumeric, right? So first of all, you need to check if this context object is null. Okay, let me throw one exception. That means the value is not found. Argument null. If route is null, let me throw exception. If route key is null, let me throw exception. If route value is null, let me throw exception. That means if these four parameters value is null, then we should not go further and check anything, right? So here only we need to throw the exception, right? Let's assume the HTTP context is not null. The route parameter, the URL is there. The key, the route parameter ID, what is the route parameter name, that is also available. And whatever the value you are passing for this route parameter, that value is also available. Then only we need to go further and we need to check, right, whether that value is in a valid format or not. So first of all, I'm using this as this is a dictionary. So I'm using this try get value method to get the dictionary, to get the value for that route key. So you are having this route key. Yes, I'm having this route key. And this is a collection. Collection means whatever the parameter, query string, all these things are going to be stored inside this route value dictionary. And from this dictionary, by using this key, I'm fetching the value. And for that purpose, I'm using this values dictionary, that try get value, right? And in that case, I'm passing this route key and it is going to return me the data in the object format. That means why it is object format? Because in this case, the data is going to be stored in the object format only. Why? Because you might be store integer value, you might be store some string value, you might store some student object value, right? Anything, any type value you want to store. And do we know if we want to store different kind of values, right? Then there is only one data type that is available in C#, that is object, because object is the superclass of all .NET types, right? So in this case, it is going to return me the data in object format. And in this case, if this key is available, then only it is going to return me the data. And once it return me the data, then I need to convert that data into string format. And then I'm using this regex and using this each match method. And this each match method, what exactly it is going to do? It is going to take two parameters. One is your connection, one is your input data, whatever the value. And the second parameter is nothing but your, what I can say, that validation string, right? That validation string. So in this case, uh, explaining this, what I can say, regex, right, is beyond the scope of this session, right? I can't explain. Even I do not know what exactly this meaning is all about, right? I just Google it and I just got how to validate alphanumeric string in C# using regex, and I got this and I tested it and it is working fine. So in that case, what I'm doing, now I'm passing this parameter string, and in this case, it is going and checking. It is checking whether this parameter contains A to Z or capital A to Z or small a to Z. Is it content 0 to 9? Is containing all these things, right? Then it is going to return me true. That means if this parameter string contains alphabet from small a to small z, capital A to capital Z, anything is fine. If it is containing number from 0 to 9, right? Anything is fine. If it contain both alphabet and numeric, then in that case, this is match method is going to return true, and I'm returning true here, right? And if it is not matching, right, if it is not returning, in that case, if it return false, in that case, the else block is going to be execute, and in that case, I'm returning false. And if in this case, if this route key is not available, right, for this route key, there is no value available, or this route key is not available itself in the dictionary, then in that case also we are going to return false. So basically this match method, it will check whatever the route parameter value you are passing, whether that route parameter value is a valid value or not. When it is going to be a valid value, if the value contains both numeric as well as alphabets, then it is going to be a valid value. If it contains only alphabet, then it is invalid. If it contains only numeric, then also it is invalid. So in that case, I'm using this one, but you can write any logic. So you can write here mobile validation logic that rejects. You can use. You can use email validation also here. You can, once you get the data, then you can check what is the range of the value, whether it is a valid value. See, as per your logic, you need to decide whether the value is a valid value or not. And it is up to you only, right? And then once you create this constant, then we need to use this constant in our URL pattern, right? To use any constant, right? First of all, we need to add that constant to the dependency injection container. And we are having, right, and we need to register this constant, right? Where we need to register? We need to register this to the constant map dictionary, right? So this constant map, what exactly this is a dictionary that contains the route constants. So whatever the route constant you created, right? For example, in our application, I have created only one constant. Like this, if you are having other URL pattern, right, in other URL pattern also you can create some constant. So whatever constant you created in your application, all the constants are internally stored by this dictionary, right? What is the dictionary name? The dictionary name is uh, constant map. So we need to register, we need to add our constant into this constant map dictionary. And we know that the dictionary means there should be some key as well as there should be some value. Because dictionary means it is going to store the data in the form of a key value pair. And we can add our constant, our user defined constant to this constant map dictionary using two ways. One, I can use add routing method. Another, I can use this configured method. Let me show you both the approach. So first of all, let me go to the services, right? So what I'm doing, I'm adding. So services, you can add any order, any sequence, no matter. So build up that services using this add routing method. What I'm doing, I'm using this constant map to add the alphanumeric, right? So here I'm giving the name. Name means you can give any name, and here I'm giving alphanumeric. And to this alphanumeric, I'm adding the constant, right? Means what is the class name, that type you need to provide. And to provide a type, you need to use type of alphanumeric. This is one of the approach to add your user defined constant to this constant map dictionary. And the second approach is this one, right? So in this case, I'm using add routing method, and here I'm using the configure method. And to this, here I'm creating a variable of options, and here I'm using the generic method where you need to specify what is the type parameter route option, and then using this route option, I can make use of the same constant map, and I can add the user defined. So you can add. So any approach is fine, whichever approach you like you can use. So I'm commenting one of the approach. So basically, the step one, you need to create your own constant by implementing the iRoute constant interface. This iRoute constant interface, if you go to the definition, then it is having one method, that is match. So what exactly this match method do? Determines whether the URL parameters contains a valid for this constant, right? For what constant you are creating this match method, right? That parameter contains a valid value or not, that is going to be that is going to be checked by this match method. If it is checked, then if it is valid value, it is going to return true. If not valid, then it is going to return false. The first step is used to create a class. right? The second step, you need to register your custom constant class. And to register your custom constant class to the dependency injection, you need to use this builder.services, because this will register your services to the built-in dependency injection container. But in our application, all the constants are stored inside one variable, inside one dictionary, and that dictionary name is constant map. And to this dictionary, I'm adding the constant. But as it's a dictionary, as we know, dictionary means it is going to store the data in the form of a key value pair. So in this case, the key is alphanumeric and the value is this alphanumeric constant. Now, if you go to the definition, then you will see this is the key and this is the value, right? So we are adding the constant. So this is not yet done. So once you add this, then what you need to do, you need to use this alphanumeric constant in your route parameter. So what is my route parameter? My route parameter is this one. So in this route parameter, I can apply this alphanumeric constant. So that's it. So now, whenever you pass this data, so this constant is going to be executed. And this constant means it should have the match method. And this match method is going to be executed. And this match method is going to check whatever the value you are passing, whether that is a valid value or not, right? And if you want to make this as an optional parameter, just put a question mark. That's it. So now if you run the application, right, then you will get the data as expected, right? So by default, this index action method is executed. Why it is executed? Because this is a optional parameter. Why? Because we are putting the question mark. Now I want to execute this details action method, right? So to execute this details action method, what I'm going to do, I'm using student slash details, right? Now, if I execute, it is executed. Why? Because this ID parameter is a optional parameter. Now I'm passing ABC123 alphanumeric string. I'm passing for the route parameter. Now, if you execute, then it will give you the output as expected. Now, just pass the ABC value only string. So only string means it's a valid value or invalid value, guys.
Valid value.
So invalid
Valid.
value means how it is a valid value. It should be invalid because the constant what we have applied, it should contain both alphabet and a numeric. If I'm passing only alphabet, then it's an invalid value. If I'm passing only numeric, then it's a valid value or invalid value.
Invalid.
Invalid value means it should give me 404. If I'm passing 1, 2, 3, X, Y, Z, it's a valid value or invalid value.
Valid.
Valid. So it should return me the data. If I'm removing this altogether, then what it should return me? It should execute the action method. Now, if your requirement is that this parameter should not be an optional parameter, it's a mandatory parameter. Then what you need to do? You just need to remove this question mark. With this question mark, now you cannot access, right, without passing any value, right? For example, by default, no method is going to be executed. Now, if you go to home slash details, right, then you will see that by default it will not execute, right? So in that case, what it is required, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, any alphanumeric value is mandatory. Why I'm not getting this data? Oh, it's student controller. Passing home controller, it should be student controller, right? So you should get the data as expected. Clear, guys? How you can create your own constraint and how you can use that one constraint. So in that case, any region you want to do some email ID validation, you can make use of here the pattern, right? For email validation that you need to pass. Mobile number validation, that is possible. Some integer value you want to check whether that integer value is within that particular range or not, that is also possible. How? Okay, let me change this pattern, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm checking, so it should accept only integer values, and in that case convert that to int 32, right? If it is not converted int 32, and then it is going to check if, right, parameter value integer, right, any name it can be, if this value is greater than 10 and this value is less than 20, then it should be a valid, and else it should be invalid value. All right. And in that case, while executing this application, if any exception occurred, right? If any exception occurred, then in that case, what I'm going to do from the catch block, right? What I'm going to do, I'm going to return false, right? So from the catch block, I'm going to return false, because if you are not passing any integer value, at that time it will throw one exception, and that exception I can handle in the catch block, and from the catch block it is going to return me false. So in that case, now if you pass anything which is greater than 10 and less than 20, that will be considered okay, right? Greater than equals to and less than equals to. So also it is up to you. So whatever the value, now run the application and see, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use student slash details, student slash details. I'm passing 15. It's a valid value or invalid value?
Valid value.
Then you will get the data. I'm passing 115. It's a valid value or invalid value? Invalid value, you will get error. If I'm passing 150 ABC, it is a invalid value, I'm getting the error. If I'm passing ABC, then it's an invalid value, I'm getting the error. So basically, if anything which is not possible using the default constant, then in that case, you can create your own constant. But in generally, we do not create this kind of a constant, because we generally use model validation, right? Data annotation, where we are going to define our one constant. But this constant is available. If you want, then you can use this one. And this constant, it is not only you can use with convention based routing, right? Convention based routing like this, it is also possible to use in attribute routing. That is how to use attribute routing. That is what we are going to discuss in our right, in tomorrow class, right? So let me change these things, right? I want to use that alphanumeric. So guys, anybody having any question, they can ask me now.
Sir, what is name of you have mentioned in the
Sorry, this name.
hello? No,
Yes,
not
yes,
here
this
in the not here. There name of HTTP context, name of route key in the through exception.
So this one.
Yes, yes. The next
So
word.
right. So basically, this name of means what is the parameter name, right? For that parameter name, you are throwing one exception. Similarly, type of means what is the type of the object, that type information it gives. In this case, what is the parameter name? So HTTP context, right? So this parameter name, it is going to throw that this
Oh,
HTTP
okay.
context object will be throwing an exception. This route parameter name, it is throwing one exception, right? Name of, type of. Instead of name of, you can also use type of. Right, so in this case you can't use type of, because that's not possible here. Here you can use name of. So type of means what is the fully qualified name, and the name of means what is the name of this parameter. That what, even though if you do not want to use this thing, right, you can do this hard coded HTTP context. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, clear.
Right?
Thank you.
Anything, any message you want to send, right? Whenever this parameter is, right, what you can say HTTP context is not. So that is also fine. Clear, guys? Even though this is not required, right? But I'm just showing, right? As this method taking this parameter, if you want to do some kind of changes, modification, right? Then you can also. But in general, in real time, we are never going to create such constant, right? But it's possible you can create.
Sir, which is the best method? Whether we can create a routing constraints or can we handle inside?
Model validation using data annotation and the fluent API. That is the best approach.
Okay. One more approach I feel like inside the action method also we can check the type and other things. No, we will get the
Yes.
value in.
Exactly. Within this
Okay.
action method, you will get the value.
Yes.
And within, suppose you create one view for the student registration, right? And in the student registration purpose, you create one controller, one model class, and that model class having some property rights to ID, name, mobile number, registration number, right? And in that property, you can make use of a data annotation attribute and do the validation. Right? That is what possible, right? So whatever you
Yes.
are saying within the index action method means that is what I'm saying. Within the index action method, you can do the validation manually. You can do the validation using data annotations, right? You can even do the validation using Fluent API. Those things are a preferred approach, and those things we are going to discuss in our coming sessions, right? Because we need to
Okay,
go
sir.
step by step, right? Until and unless we are not discussing, right? How you can create a text box, how you can create a drop-down list, checkbox, right? All these things we will
Okay.
discuss first. Then I will show you how exactly entity framework core is going to be work. And once we discuss that HTML tag helpers and entity framework core, then I will show you how you can make use of a model validation, how you can store the data, right? Whatever the form data using the model object, how you can store into the entity framework core. Using entity framework core, how you can store into the database, how you can make use of a dapper, right? Or everything I'm going to discuss, right? But we are going step by step,
Okay, sir. Okay.
right? But whatever we are explaining, we should understand. Yes, this is one concept is available that you can create your own constraint and you can apply. Clear, guys?
Sir, what is the use of that name? So
Sorry?
we are using in program.cs name, right? Within the root, default root name. Yeah.
See, what is the name means? See, if you are not providing any name, then what will happen? So here you can give, right? So this name means if you are creating multiple URL pattern, right? Then to differentiate each pattern, we need to provide one name. So this name means whenever this pattern is going to be stored in the where in the routing engine, right? So this pattern is going to be stored. For this pattern, we need to provide one name. So this is the name of the pattern, this is the pattern, and these are the default values. So it is going to stored in the dictionary, right? So for the not exactly in the dictionary, but you can consider it is going to store the pattern in the form of a key value pair. What is the name of the pattern and what is exactly the pattern? To store them, we need one name, and that's why the name should be unique.
Okay.
Right? Because in a dictionary, we cannot have a two key with the same name.
Okay.
Right? That name is not important, but important is pattern. You can give any name, but as per your requirement, you need to provide the pattern.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. Clear, guys?
And default we can always specify, or we can omit the default value also.
Sorry?
The default value that you have given, that we
See,
can omit
it
that
is
one.
up to you. It is up to you. If you omit this default value, then whenever you visit to your root URL, then by default it is not going to execute any action method or any right anything. Right. So what is your requirement? Do you want to execute something if you do not specify in the URL anything? Yes, I want to execute. Then make use of this default. If you don't want, then don't use. It is up to you only.
Okay.
Any more question from anyone else?
Can we add like more than one pattern pointing to a particular action method?
No, no, no. So for a particular action method of more than one button, yes, you can. But in that case, suppose in this case, I'm using this one, right? Student all and student details. So you can see this is one button and all students. I'm making this student all student, right? And here I'm putting this student details action. So in this case, if you are passing this pattern right in the URL, then this student controller action method is going to be executed. If you are passing this pattern, then whatever the controller action method you specify, that is going to be executed. Clear?
Yes. So can you put it like together in the same
No, 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 no.
app.map control? Okay,
No,
got it.
same. It's not possible. There is you cannot use this two times the pattern because this method is defined, right? And this method means it is taking this parameter. So what is the
Oh,
endpoint? What is the name? What is the pattern? There are two. There is no two parameter that you can use like this. Parameter means it's a this method is having one parameter whose name is pattern. So pattern means you cannot use two, right? This is not possible. These are the parameters.
okay.
Clear, guys? And this
And
is
in the
nothing but you can say named parameter.
and in the beginning, like you showed, we are using add controller with views, and there is one more add MVC, right? So what is the exact difference between both?
So you are attending the session recently, or you are from the beginning,
From the beginning, I missed one or two.
right? So if you are attending from the beginning, right, then you should know these things. So this session we have discussed add controller, add MVC, add controller with views, and add result pages. So based on the method what you are using, right, what are the functionality you are going to get, that is going to be vary. Add MVC means everything is possible. Add controller with views means whatever required for controller for MVC based application, those functionalities are going to be provided. Add controller means there is no support for views concept, right? Add Razor pages means it only provides the services, right, which are required for Razor pages applications, right? Just go through this session, right, and you will
Okay,
understand
okay,
this.
I'll do this. Thank you.
So we have already discussed one, right? Even though if you go through the documentation, then you will also understand. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So tomorrow we are going to discuss attribute routing, right? So with that, our routing concept will be completed. And once routing completed, then I will explain what is this view start, what is this view import, right? What is this layout view, right? All these things we are going to discuss after this. Okay. Right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.